This is the Book Legion Podcast, where we review thought-provoking books to give our Legionnaires the knowledge they need to dominate the next level of their life.
Everybody, thanks so much for joining me here on the Book Legion. This is your host, Tyser Evans. This week, I'm going to be talking about the book, You by the hip-hop preacher, Eric Thomas. So if you've been underneath a rock in the motivational space the last 10 years and never heard of Eric Thomas, I'll give you a brief bio and background on who he is. So he's known as E.T., the hip-hop preacher. He's from Detroit. He's been on the motivational scene for a long time, speaking for, I want to say at least 20 years he's been speaking. But really, that's in the last 10 years has blown up where he's a household name, really leveraged the influencer space well to get his great message across. So why he's called a hip-hop preacher is obviously he's got a love for hip-hop, so that came naturally to him. He's also a PhD. He's someone who's been a counselor. He's got a really incredible story. So he grew up in Detroit, single mother meets a stepfather who really adopts Eric and becomes a father figure to him. He finds out at 16 that man, his stepfather, was actually not his biological father, and it really enraged him. He was very angry that he felt he had been lied to his whole life and took on what he talks about as more of a victim-type mentality. And so he leaves home, was not kicked out. He decided to leave home. So he left home at 16 and became homeless, slept in abandoned buildings, eventually ends up getting a car, sleeping in a car. But while he's going through this phase of being an angry teenager and being homeless, he goes and starts working with the church. And the church was able to give him food and shelter at times with people would take him in. So the church really starts to become his family, his home, his sanctuary, with people he can trust and can take care of. So that's a little bit who E.T. is. He eventually does reconcile with his mother and his stepfather. And at the same time, through the church, he actually meets his future wife, Dee Dee. And they have a really great relationship and a great story themselves. And she's been instrumental in his life. You know, now that she met him when he was living in his car, and she was one of the people that was helped taking care of him, although they're roughly about the same age. But she stuck with him. And now, you know, obviously he's made millions and millions and millions of dollars and influenced millions of people, more importantly. And so she's been along for the whole ride, and he really dedicates his life to her, which I really, really appreciate. So that's a little bit about Eric's background. So, you know, kind of an interesting perspective, you know, growing up in Detroit, bit of a rough background, right? But he did come from a good home foundation, and he did have a lot of great people in his life that wanted to help elevate him and mentor him and make sure that he got back on his path, which he did most importantly. So I'm going to cover my 3 favorite chapters of the book. Let's dive in. So the first chapter I want to cover is chapter 2. You're never in it by yourself. And what I love that he starts the premise in talking about the book, as I kind of referenced talking about his bio, is that, you know, he for a long time had this victim mentality of always looking at, why does this keep happening to me? Why did people lie to me? Why am I so angry? Right? And this was actually really interesting. On page 42, I want to read this short passage to you guys, because it was something that really resonated with me, because I had struggled a little bit with the own stuff with my family childhood and whatnot, and some of the things that happened. And so this passage in the book in particular gave me a different type of perspective for me to be able to look at and analyze my own quote-unquote childhood trauma, right? Victim mentality makes you see what hasn't been done for you as opposed what has been done for you. I always say where your focus goes, your energy flows. And what I love about that, and it's so true, is that oftentimes, right, it's just like you can have this whole great year as a child. Like you can be 7, have this perfect year, but maybe you had a really bad week, or you had a really bad weekend where you did something stupid and you got into really big trouble, or you got spanked a few times. And what people tend to do is like focus on that one really bad event, or focus on that one thing where the one time your dad spanked you, your mom, you know, spanked you, as opposed to like looking at the other 363 days of the year that were seemingly really well and were really good, and there was a lot of positivity. And so I've definitely been victim of that to myself, where I focus on the negative things that happened to me when I was a child, as opposed to thinking about the family camping trips, the family vacations, the trips, the day trips to the beach, right? Going to Disneyland, these different things I got to experience as a child. And so it really helped me to reframe my focus on understanding my own kind of victimhood mentality, which I've done a lot of work around the last 10 years. But in my 20s, I was terrible with everything was like, poor me, poor Ty. And I had to look at like, my life's pretty good. Yeah, I definitely had some trials and tribulations, but we all do. And you have to go through those in order to be able to grow and to have life experiences, right? It's the only way that you can help other people is by going through your own stuff. So chapter 2, I really like the things that he focused on there with talking about your victim mentality. And then also he talks a lot about who you surround yourself with, right? How those people build you up. And that's a recurring theme. I've talked about it before. You got to be cognizant of the 5 closest people you spend time with, because you will be the 6th, right? Inevitably, whatever they're into. If they're into drugs or they're out of shape, they're people that are just not vested in pursuing personal growth, then inevitably, if you spend enough time around those people, you will become like them. The second chapter I want to talk about is chapter 7, which is Become a Triple Threat. And this chapter really focuses big on education, which is why I want to talk about it. The main thing that he talks about in the beginning that stood out to me was falling in love with learning. And this is where I think that I've just, for whatever reason, I've always loved to learn. School was really easy for me. And so I continue to, obviously, why I have the Book Legion, right? Because I love reading books, because I love learning new knowledge. I think it's great to get to learn from other people. Like, I can take someone's 100-year experience, and they put it in a 300-page book, and now I get to have access to that 100 years worth of experience and knowledge that I can apply to my own life by reading a book that may take me 2 days. Like, that's just, to me, it's just incredible leverage to get to a different skill set. Like, you can be mentored by the masters, right? Whether it's spirituality, finances, relationships, the masters, the best of what they've done through books. Like, you don't even need to meet those people. You can read Plato's, Socrates, Leonardo da Vinci work, right? He talks a lot about people that he followed here in the books, and he talks a lot about this, all these different people that were influential and the type of material that they wrote about. And he gave a great quote in here: "Your mind is a tool, education is what sharpens the stone," right? And that's just it. Like, we all have the cognitive ability to be quote unquote smart. And just not a lot of us apply ourselves after high school or especially after college. We think that we're done with learning. No, learning is continuous. Like, learning is constant. You should, every day, if you just read 10 pages in a book every day, that would take you no more than 15 minutes, it would literally change your life. So he pays a special attention on why learning is so powerful, how it really helps to sharpen your mind, your skill set, and makes you way more valuable the more you know. And the more valuable you are, that's how you get paid more. So I talk to a lot of people about stop trading time for money and start trading value for money, because the more valuable you become, the more that you will get paid. That I can promise you. And then the last chapter that I want to cover is chapter 8, which is Sacrifice Good for Great. And, I've read Good to Great by Jim Collins, but this is not what that chapter is about. This is about being unfamiliar is the most interesting place to be. So being unfamiliar is the most interesting place to be. And what does that really mean? It means he's talking about your comfort zone, right? Pain produces things that complacency can't, is another quote that I wrote down in there. And the reason why this really resonated with me is because, and I've talked about it on the Book Legion before, but more on my other podcast, Grind So Elevate, is that, it's only through adversity, it's only by experiencing the bitter do you understand the sweet. It's only having the ones can you truly enjoy the tens. And so, for me, I was complacent for 8 years at a job. I worked at a job in Southern California, and I was making good money, and I did get a couple small promotions here and there, but I knew that I was not on the trajectory that I wanted to be financially or career-wise. And it was a good place for a lot of people to work. It still is a great place for a lot of people to work. I really enjoyed the people I got to meet, but I knew that I was complacent. I was just getting by. I was pretty happy. I was like, hey, I'm 30, I'm making 6 figures. Like, I can take care of my family. Like, I drive a nice car, like, live in a nice neighborhood. Like, I seemingly had checked all the boxes of nice things, but in my heart, I knew so that I was underserving my own human potential. And so my wife and I decided to move to Georgia. So we moved to Georgia from Southern California. I took a 6-figure pay cut. We dumped pretty much our whole life savings and bought a house in Georgia. Then we spent a bunch of money fixing up the house. And so here I moved. My wife had a thriving business in Southern California, and she sold. So we literally went from 2 really solid incomes to 1 very small income, and spent all of our cash, and we had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So it was terrifying. It was terrifying. But I knew the opportunity that had been presented to me was I would be able to double my income over the next 24 months if I could perform. And so I was confident in my ability to perform. And even if I didn't have the ability, I knew I would put in the work to attain the skills that it would take in order to get to where I wanted to be. But, to a lot of people, moving across the country, spending all of your money, going into a new job, going into a new industry, not knowing a single person in Georgia. I knew literally nobody in Georgia. It was terrifying. But he said, what was my alternative? Stay complacent and stay in the same spot. So I decided to take the risk. I had to sacrifice what was good in order to get great. Fast forward 18 months, I had tripled my income, had gotten promoted, had won all kinds of awards, and was as happy as I'd ever been. It completely took care of all of our financial debt, completely wiped out, actually with one paycheck that I had made. But it took an 18-month build, right? A lot of stressful days, a lot of, me like feeling guilty for buying a book. I got to the point, I remember I was going to lunch with some colleagues, and they're like, hey, where do you guys want to go? And I was like, hey, I'll go with you guys, but I can't eat. And they're like, why? And I said, I got $11 in my checking account. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? Right? Because I was still driving a nice car. They saw I had a big house, but they didn't know like this whole background story that I was trying to rebuild. So anyway, I love that because sacrifice good for great. A lot of times people think that the only way you get great is you come from this shitty spot like Eric did and eventually got great. But a lot of us will fall into this trap of complacency where everything is good. Seemingly there's no problems. But it doesn't mean that we don't have more gas in the tank to keep pushing ourselves to get to new levels of success. And that's really, to me, how this chapter resonated with me. So overall, a really good book. Very simple read. He's a great storyteller. Some really inspirational stories in here with things he has had to overcome, things he's had to overcome with his wife. He doesn't talk about it often. He does talk about it pretty often, but his wife, Dee Dee, has MS. And so he talks about how that was another hurdle they've had to overcome together, and watching the way that he had to position his schedule to be able to be home more with his family. He's an incredible guy, and he's got an incredible team as well built around him, which he talks about, which is pretty cool. And again, surrounding yourself with great people that are like-minded, that see your vision, help to elevate you and continue to push you in different directions is really key. So I'll post a link to the book, so scroll right down the show notes for YouTube or the podcast. However you're consuming this content, you take a link. I think it's right around anywhere from $15 to $20 for the paperback. Hardcover like I got might be closer to $25, but it's worth the read. So Eric Thomas, go watch his videos on YouTube too. His videos on YouTube are really unbelievable. They're ones that I listen to often in the gym or when I'm on a long road trip. Listening to his content is phenomenal. So thank you guys so much for watching. And again, if you haven't done so, check out Grind, Sell, Elevate. That is my other podcast. It's on all outlets, and that's where I do. It's usually 30 to 45 minutes of me interviewing a business professional. There's a great salesperson, a CEO. We talk about leadership or how they've scaled companies. I have marketing people on. I've had health and wellness people on, people who, one of the last guys I had on, he's got his own podcast. He's got 4 million. I just had Anthony Iannarino on, which I've done one of his book reviews. So Anthony and I did a interview. So you got to check that interview out with Anthony Iannarino if you liked the content I did for his book, Elite Sales Strategies. So if you guys haven't done so, make sure you please subscribe to this podcast. Check out Grind, Sell, Elevate, and I will check you guys out next week. Thanks so much. Dum, 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 dum.